I want a decision at the end of our conversation because you will have gotten all the information that you need to make that decision. There's no reason that a decision should not be made. And oftentimes, I will start the conversation with kind of giving them the agenda of what's going to happen. And as part of that agenda and at the end of our conversation, we're going to make a decision together whether this is a good fit for you or not. Either's okay, but we do want to make a decision today.
Tom, thank you so much for joining me on the Let's Talk Business podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Meny.
Yeah, so my listeners are very familiar with this line, but I'll say it anyway because we're talking for the first time. Is one of the things I love about the show is when I have one guest referring another guest. Actually, you came referred through Wendy Weiss. Wendy was actually one of the few that came back a second time on the show because the first time all about cold calling was so popular. And then she had a whole part that we didn't get to speak about. So she came back a second time. So the stakes are high because if she referred you, so we'll have a good conversation. For our listeners, if you don't mind, I know that you've been from, involved in DJ, flying airplanes, a strong dislike of selling. And now you're here teaching selling and speaking so much about this topic, to people that you coach and teach. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. Growing up in my family, I grew up in Iowa of all places, but my parents had this, I don't know if it was a fear or just a general dislike of salespeople. And that really shaped me going into, owning my own business and having to sell. I didn't want to be that sleazy salesperson, which is kind of the term that I think I found myself hearing growing up. And I was just like, oh, I don't want to do this, but I really love it. And I was like, how do I get, that internal conflict to go away? And I just started studying sales and excelling quite quickly at it in my own fitness business, and then started coaching other fitness professionals on the sales techniques. And I was working with a coaching company that hired me to do the coaching. And then ultimately they asked me to sell their coaching program because I was doing such a great job. And I traveled around the world, delivering talks, and we generally do a 1-day workshop, and I'd sell the program on the back end of that workshop. And so I started to combine kind of these loves of my life, which was like public speaking, which I'm sure you don't hear too many people say that they love public speaking, but I do. And then selling from the stage, which is a really unique skill set to have, to be able to not only do a public talk, but also to compel people to buy something when you're done. And in doing that, in 3 years, I generated $4 million for the company and, 300,000 air miles in my air mile bank account. So
that's cool. That's cool. So I want to go back to two things you mentioned very organically, so to speak. So one was the part that we somehow look at the sleazy salesperson and we have that negative effect to a salesperson. So I want to get to the psychology behind it, because one way or the other, I think every person in this universe at one point does selling. They sometimes could sell themselves into something. They could sell somebody else. They could convince somebody to come to work for them. They could convince somebody to give them the job, which is also a selling technique. This is the way, transactions work. This is the way the give or take of the world is set out to do. Why do we have to why do we go from having this negative approach to sales to understanding, wait, it doesn't have to be that way, because we could actually solve people's problems. We're not selling. We're actually telling you, we have solutions, and ultimately, nobody wants to be sold to. They want to be a buyer, so to speak. So what is the psychology behind it now that you are on the other side of the aisle where you're teaching selling and I have a lot of programs around it? What would you say, in that negative emotions when you speak about a salesperson?
Yeah. I mean, my primary clientele are people that I call heart-centered salespeople. So it's selling personal fitness. They're selling, chiropractic care or medical or health and wellness type of things. And for that profession, a lot of those personalities are very nurturing. And nurturing people love to build relationships with others. And sales, for whatever reason, I don't understand why or how this came about. It's always been looked at as a conflict that one person wins, one person loses. And, as, a zero sum game. And I was like, that doesn't sit well with me because I don't want to work one on one with a client and have them think that I took advantage of them when they bought the program. And I think that the shift, and this is what I teach my students too, is that shift is in our own mindset. And if we come across as that needy salesperson, the sleazy salesperson that's pushing something on somebody, that's going to turn off most of the population these days. But if we rather approach it as we are problem solvers, and our first initial obligation and duty for that prospect is to find out what their problem is and decide, can we solve it for them? And if we can't, then we refer them out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we need to get to as salespeople, as business owners and entrepreneurs, just anybody in general. Like you said, we are always selling, whether it's an idea or there's a transaction or whatever. That's what makes the world go around. And rightfully so, salespeople should be the highest paid people in any organization.
Would you say that part of the problem was that maybe growing up, we were used to those people knocking on your door and trying to sell something that you really never thought you need or really didn't need 5 minutes after buying it? So automatically that gave that gave us the blanket, notion of how sales is, and when in reality that's not selling at all.
Right. Well, 100%. So I'll tell you a story, and this is probably where I got this fear of selling and salespeople. So, I was a very sly, precocious child growing up. I was the youngest of three sons. So I got everything I ever wanted, basically. My parents, they were just done raising kids at that point. But I saw an ad in the newspaper where, if you allowed this person to come over and demonstrate a vacuum cleaner, they would give you a set of steak knives.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, that is awesome. We need some new steak knives. And I thought I was doing something really good for the family. So I called up, pretend I was my father, and I invited the salesperson over to the house to demonstrate. I was like, oh, family meeting. We have a special guest today. And my parents were like, what are you talking about? And then doorbell rings. It's this guy with a vacuum cleaner, Eureka. I don't know what he was selling. And my dad just looks at me. It's like, Thomas, what did you do? I'm like, oh, well, he's going to give us some steak knives. All we have to do is just sit and listen to him for 30 minutes. And, he's like vacuuming half of the couch and putting dirt on the floor and vacuuming it up. And, my parents just scolded. I think I got grounded, but I did get the steak knives. So the family did benefit from that 30 minutes. Yeah.
Those are the memories that people have, and therefore anytime we speak about, what do you do? I'm a salesperson. All of a sudden, we have that persona about a salesperson, but in reality,
Yep.
that shouldn't be the case. We'll come back to sales. I also want to, take note of something you mentioned before. You mentioned about you getting to do stuff that you really love doing. You mentioned the public speaking and the selling and combining that. How much would you say you contribute your success in what you're doing based on you ended up finding out what you're good at and trying to find a profession around what you're good at?
Yeah, I think I actually did it backwards. I went into the profession, especially fitness. I went through a whole body transformation when I was 30 years old. I was overweight, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. And I did a 12-week body transformation program and lost 40 pounds of fat and gained 10 pounds of muscle in just 12 weeks. But more importantly, got my cholesterol in order and my blood pressure down as well. And that is what I found the passion of fitness. And that's why I went into fitness. And then once I'm owning my fitness business, now I'm like, oh, crap, now I need to sell. And I couldn't. I almost went broke in the first 6 months of owning that business because like this was my sales process. Somebody would come in the front door of the business, and we were in this little shopping mall, strip mall next to a Subway restaurant. It's a great place to be. And somebody would come in, I'd be working out with the client, and they'd go up to the person and say, yeah, what do you want? And literally kind of like that, really good rapport building, right? Yeah, what do you want? And they're like, oh, I might be interested in some personal training. Oh, okay. Well, it's $60 a session. You buy 10 sessions, you get 11 for free. Do you want it? And of course, they would be like, oh, let me think about it. I was like, okay, well, here's my card. When you think about it, come on back. And then I would go back to my client. And no wonder I almost went broke. Compared to then, going broke and then hiring a coach to help me with my business. And she was actually pretty nice about it. It was like, you really need to work on your sales. So let me give you some books to look at and a kind of a process to go through. And so I really did a lot of deep dive into the sales process, sales psychology, and really around that consultative approach to selling, because that's ultimately in health and wellness, it has to be a win-win or else it's not going to work long term. And once I got this whole process down, the first consultation that I did, and it was completely different than what I had described. I sat down with my prospect. We had a computer in front with a screen with a little presentation that I was going to show, showing what they get. But I started like 80% of the conversation was asking questions about what her goals are, why they're important, what she's doing or what she's done in the past to fix a problem, and why is now the right time. And just kind of drilling down into those until I got to an emotional response. Went through the presentation, and then at the end, I was like, Sharon, and her name is Sharon, based on what you told me, based on your goals, and in my expert opinion, you really need to invest in our 100 session package to reach those goals. Now, you could probably get there in 50 sessions, but I really recommend the 100 session package. Which would you prefer? And it was all I could do to just shut up and not say anything while she thought. Because, most salespeople at that moment would go, oh, she didn't say yes. Oh, I need to lower the price. Oh, maybe I give her a free week to try it out and see if she likes it or whatever. But in reality, she was probably thinking, okay, well, like maybe I could do 2 days, maybe 3 days a week would start, and I could do that Monday. And, just you don't know what's going on inside the prospect's head. So that's why it's so important to just kind of zip it up and not say anything. And then it was just like this awkward silence for, it seemed like forever. I'm sure it was like 10 seconds or whatever. And she was like, okay, that sounds good. Can I put that on my MasterCard? And I was like, I think actually what I said was, are you sure? And
Yeah.
she gave me her credit card. I swiped it and went through. And I was like, oh my gosh, 5 grand.
Yeah.
It was $5,000. Going from maybe 600, selling one person $600 package to going to ultimately after a couple months, I was 90% close rate and selling $2,000 to $5,000 packages for personal training. It's crazy.
So one of the things that I've seen, and I've met many, many salespeople and throughout my career, and one of the things I've seen too many times is where salespeople are afraid of the no. Therefore, they'll continue the conversation, feel good about the conversation, although they're not making any progress on the actual sale, for the good or for the bad, so to speak. And they just avoid the no. They avoid ending the conversation. So what's next, so to speak, and getting that concrete on the response from a lead. What could you speak about that topic?
Yeah, well, not getting a no or getting a decision. I think that's the main thing, right? Is
Sure.
I want a decision at the end of our conversation, because you will have gotten all the information that you need to make that decision. There's no reason that a decision should not be made. And oftentimes I will start the conversation with kind of giving them the agenda of what's going to happen. And as part of that agenda and at the end of our conversation, we're going to make a decision together whether this is a good fit for you or not. Either's okay, but we do want to make a decision today. And getting that permission at the end, I generally don't get the whole, let me think about it kind of excuse.
I remember, like, I interviewed somebody in my show. I forgot, the moment, the name is skipping my mind. He shared a story where he was a rookie salesperson. He was sitting in the room on speakerphone with a whole board. And somehow he had such a good meeting. He was, giving thumbs up for his team throughout the process, how good the meeting is going. For some reason, the phone stayed on after they finished the meeting. Today, it's pretty common with Zoom. So people will just leave the Zoom meeting open. And he heard one
Uh,
of the people telling the other people that, luckily we got this rookie salesperson. So he gave us everything we need in order to understand how we can negotiate with the competitor that we're going with.
ah,
And then this was a transformational moment for him because he said, how could I go from giving thumbs up to my team, how well I'm doing and how well the conversation is going, to be
mm,
totally disconnected how the other people are actually feeling? Like, how come I didn't read the other people? And this is where it made him decide that as a salesperson, you got to make sure that you're really on top of your game as far as understanding the dynamics, what's happening. Who are the decision
yeah,
makers? When are they ready for a decision, and so on and so forth? And I think what you just mentioned is so important. I guess my follow-up
yeah,
question to you is, another thing that I constantly hear from salespeople is, maybe I'm not made for sales. They started sales, very motivated, and they're gonna do whatever it takes, so to speak. And then it fizzles out 3 months, 6 months, and so on. And then at one point say,
yeah.
you know what, maybe sales is not for me. I have my version of how I respond to that, but I would want to hear you as the guest. Like, when somebody would tell you that, how would you respond?
That was literally me. I couldn't close the door. Like I had several different sales jobs kind of growing up. I don't know if you know Cutco cutlery. It's all
Yeah.
direct sales. Yeah. So I did that for 6 months. And I mean, I think I paid for my own knife set. That was it. I didn't make any money doing it. I didn't know the process. And as an introvert, also, like I didn't have the natural gift of gab, a pretty shy person when I meet people for the first time. And like, going up, knocking on somebody's door that I've never met before, even though I had an appointment, was just really nerve wracking. I just couldn't get over that. And, fast forward to then, having to sell because either that or close my business. And I was so invested in keeping my business alive. I was like, okay, buck up and just like do something about the sales. And it was really the mindset shift of I am a problem solver now and I have to find a process to sell. And that's the key word, is that it's a process. And when you treat it like a process, then you do it the same way each and every time, and you'll get the same result, which is the sale at the end of it. And I think that's the difference between introverted salespeople and extroverted salespeople. Because a lot of extroverted salespeople allow themselves to just go with the flow. And, if my energy's high today, I'm selling. If my energy's low today, I'm not selling. And for me, it was just like, I don't care what my energy is. I'm going to follow the process and I'm going to make a sale.
So back to the question directly is, you mentioned obviously this was you, which obviously then that makes
Mm-hmm.
you for a good coach because you were at that
Yeah.
stage. I guess the question is, where is it coming from? So based on what you're just answering, is it coming from not having a good sales process?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
think not understanding what the process is and having that misconceived notions of what a salesperson is. Because I think everybody sees the outlandish salesperson that's at the life of the party, is always talking to everybody at every networking event, is like flirting around to everybody in the crowd.
Hmm.
And that's just not the case. I mean, anybody can sell. It is a skill like any other skill. And I've taught people that I would never have thought would be able to sell to be able to sell.
Hmm. You mentioned a moment ago about, you being an introvert, and I know that this
Mm.
is also a conversation with salespeople in general about, do you need to be an extrovert in order to be a great salesperson? Because they're used to those loud people. Those are the people that make a lot of noise. You know, in terms of you teaching other salespeople, so of course a lot of them might be introverts and extroverts. Is it different learning the trade of selling for an introvert versus an extrovert?
The training is not different. It's most likely the approach that an introvert will take versus an extrovert. But what I find is when I'm coaching extroverts, they're not so clear on the process. They're like, I'll just wing it. And their sales, quite frankly, kind of show that willy-nilly kind of effect to following the process. Some weeks are great, some weeks aren't. But if you just stick with the process, and this is what like introverts are really good at, is following a process because it's just it's, you know, okay, rapport building. I don't like to rapport build, but I'll ask these three questions. How's your day today?
Mhm.
Yeah. And you learn to adapt. And I think a lot of times the extroverted salespeople will spend way too much time on like rapport building and then talking to the prospect instead of allowing the prospect to do all the talking, right? We have 2 ears and one mouth, so we need to use them proportionately in the
Yeah,
sales conversation.
that's one of our core values at PTEX is two ears and one mouth. We use them in that order and that proportion.
Yeah, nice.
Let me ask you, because you mentioned it before, as far as the sales process for introverts, it makes they follow a better process. So what I've seen a lot is sales business owners start a small business, and maybe they're great at the art or the product development or whatever service they offer. But a lot of times they don't come with sales backgrounds and then they don't like doing the selling, so to speak. And this is actually a line that I heard from Wendy Weiss, a great line, cold calling. He says, when somebody tells her that I don't like doing cold calling, says ice cream, you could like love or hate. If you have to do something for your business, it's not about liking or not liking. It's about you got to do it or you don't. I guess there's something that you're passionate about because a lot of salespeople, a lot of business owners try to outsource the selling part of their business because they're so not comfortable. You have your opinions about it. Let me hear a little about what you feel about business owners being their own selling their own services.
Yeah. Well, at first, the business owner should be the primary salesperson because the business owner knows the most about their product and how that product can be used by their prospects and their clients. But at a certain point, you know, if you're doing really great with sales, your business is growing, you're going to need to add to your team as well. And that too can then kind of shift some problems around if they don't have a good management process in place and a good scripting of the sales process and how to do a sales call. It's going to be like up to the salesperson. And that's never a really good thing when you bring a new salesperson into your organization, even if they have tons of experience, they don't have any experience with your company. And if you don't have a good process and presentation, you just have all the pieces of that sales conversation put together, you're setting it up for failure at that point. One, create that process while you're doing the sales as a business owner, create that process and the presentation, the questions and all that. And then be able to teach that to the new salespeople coming into the organization.
One of the things you started off with, obviously, you do public speaking. You do a lot of selling from the stage, which means it's selling instead of one to one, you're selling to one to many. I found a lot of salespeople get lost when they will have a one-on-one conversation, they'll carry it very well. Now they're in a Zoom call with 10 people, decision makers, or 5 people, decision makers, and they don't know where to turn to as far as gauging everybody's interests and in understanding everybody where they're up to. What would you say is some of the practical advice you could share based on you selling from the stage? I know not all our listeners have the leverage of being on a stage and selling from there, but the
Yeah.
closest to that would be for a board or in a meeting with multiple decision makers and so on and so forth. So what could you share as far as how is that process different?
One, you're presenting. So you really have to understand what the needs are of the client or of the crowd that you're speaking to. So I always do a lot of research to know who the audience is so I can customize the presentation to fit them. And also having a just really clear understanding of what the problem is and how to solve it. And it's a one-way conversation. You're presenting to them. So then I'm going to think about what are all the different objections that they could come up with. And any salesperson should know this just for any of the products, whether it's one-on-one or one-to-many. What are the key objections? And then I'm going to address each of those objections throughout the presentation and show why that objection isn't necessary. The other aspect, sometimes you'll do this in one-on-one, but it's really critical in one-to-many, is to share stories and case studies of past clients that you've worked with, but also to share your own personal story of why you're passionate about representing this product, or if you're the business owner, why you got into this business in the first place. Because the power of the story is one, it can't be denied. So it's your story. Somebody's not going to be like, oh, you're lying about your story. It's really rude. And so it's your own personal story. They cannot say, oh, that's true or not true because it's a story. But also it creates a nice connection between you and the prospects so that they get to know you as a person. Because at the end of the day, whether it's B2B, B2C, sales, you're selling to a person, not an organization, but to a person. So, getting them to understand who you are and you understanding them, you're going to create this, it could be a friendship at some point. And it doesn't have to be, a competition or, somebody wins, somebody loses type of situation.
Yeah. I think the power of storytelling is underrated. People think that when they hear the word, sell with stories, they think that, okay, now I have to make something up. If you're a good business owner and you've solved people's problems, you've seen, with your solution, a business thriving or a company going places, so to speak, that should motivate you to actually continue doing what you're doing. And ultimately, that's the power of a story, because every person, I think I heard it, yeah, on the podcast. We had a guy with the name Mitch Axelrod, a
Mm.
phenomenal guy. He also does a lot of training on sales. And he mentioned that at the end of the day, whatever you do, you need to be in the transportation business. There's a company at point A, and they want and need to get to point B. And with your product or services, you're probably getting them. You need to see how you fit in to getting them from point A to point B. I
I
like
like
that
that.
analogy. We at PTEX, we also have a very similar positioning because we help driven brands, get to the next step in the brand journey, which means is
Mm.
you as a business owner, you don't want to stay put. You want to grow your business. You know more or less where you want to go and what you want to achieve. You sometimes suck how to get there or how to tell the world about what you're able to offer. So back to the storytelling is when somebody's sitting in that seat and listening to you and you're sharing a similar story so they could visualize. So I could be
Mhm.
that person and I'm actually also at point A, and if you're able to get that person from point A to point B, now I could visualize how you could get me there versus speaking hypothetical, speaking just trying to get into understanding what my business does. You now share the story that I see exactly that you understand what my problem is because you just
Yeah.
illustrated it so professionally, somebody that was a very similar stage. And I think with that, I always speak to salespeople about this topic is some salespeople jump to speak too much instead of listening. You mentioned before the two ears and one mouth. And most of the time you're telling, oh, you're listening because, you have to give the courtesy to the person to listen to the person. But good salespeople know they're listening because they know which story to share. If you're not giving that person a chance to explain their life story, so to speak, as far as what challenges they're going through the business, you don't know which story is the most similar if you want to visualize a solution to a person's problem other than listening to the person. The more you listen, the better you could tailor that story.
Absolutely. And not just tailor the story, but tailor your presentation, how you ultimately sell the product. Because if you don't understand what the pain points are and what the dream outcome is for your prospect, then you might as well just not do the sales presentation at all. Because there's no way to connect their dream outcome and the pain that they're in to your product, getting them out of the pain and moving them towards the pleasure.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So any other last moments of tips that you would share with salespeople listening to the show?
Yeah, well, just kind of piggyback on what I just said there, during the questioning phase or discovery phase of the conversation, and that's right at the beginning. You do rapport building, go right into questions. And it's at the questioning phase or discovery, that's when the sale is made. And I can't emphasize this enough. The questions that you're asking are really not for you. They're actually for the prospect to hear themselves say, I have a problem, I need it fixed, and I need it fixed now. And then once they've said it, now you just kind of mirror back what you heard them say so that they say, wow, yeah, you're listening, you understand me. Tell a couple of quick stories, go into your presentation, and boom, boom, you got a sale.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's the
Yeah.
questioning. That's where the money is on the questions.
Yeah, and the one thing I will just add is that a lot of people get annoyed because if I'm going to follow my sales process, maybe the lead, the prospect will get frustrated in the process. But ultimately, if you could turn it around that it's for their benefit, therefore I need to ask
Mhm.
those questions because if I don't
Yeah.
understand the situation properly, I don't know how to actually tell you what we could offer you. I think
Yeah.
that's a misconception a lot of salespeople have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of salespeople also fear kind of challenging the prospect a little bit as well, and maybe having some uncomfortable conversations, which ultimately help in the end, because you need to get people out of their own kind of, they're stuck, especially when it's a service, building a business, health and fitness. They're stuck at where they're at and they're comfortable kind of in that stuckness. And you need to kind of snap them out of it, get them out of the trance that they're in, and propel them towards making a decision to grow.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Beginning of the show, you mentioned about a giveaway that you have. You want to mention that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, talking about stories, so I have a workbook on how to create personal stories to use in presentations for sales presentations. It goes through the full step of identifying good personal stories and then taking the hero's journey. I kind of have a abbreviated version of the hero's journey that I use, and designing your story and writing it out and making sure that it's just like really dramatic and a good story with a good story process and framework. That's at my website. So it's Tom Jacobs, JACKOBS.com/storybook.
Yeah, for the links, resources mentioned in this episode, check out the show notes at www.petergroup.com/podcast, where we'll link to download the storybook and ultimately also other ways to follow Tom and everything that he teaches. So let's close with the 4 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay.
Number 1, a book that changed your life.
Think and Grow Rich.
Number 2, a piece of advice you got that you never forget.
Invest early.
Number 3, anything you wish you could go back and do differently.
Not at all.
Love it. And final question, what's still on your bucket list to achieve?
Oh, Antarctica.
Okay, that's a good bucket list. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I know your time is valuable. That is why, in the name of
No
our
worries.
listeners, we'll forever be grateful for sharing some of your time with us today. It's been a blast.
Thank you so much, Meny. Really appreciate it.